When hardened criminals repeatedly evade justice, elite police units come together to crack these toughest cases.
Police officers!
My role is investigating serious and organised crime.
We are a covert investigative team.
For the first time across the UK, we have exclusive access to the investigations of Britain's most talented detectives.
We'll spend years putting together all of these tiny pieces of evidence.
The most bizarre investigation I've been involved in.
And share the methods and evidence that can bring these criminals to book.
Handguns coming in from the United States.
He had the drugs.
That is a lot of money. A real who did it.
This time in Lancashire, a deadly hit and run on a busy street.
The vehicle that mounts the curb, hits the female, she's up into the air and it's thrown about 30, 40 feet.
Turns out to be a brutal revenge attack.
If you rob, steal from a drugs line, then there's going to be some sort of repercussions.
And the ultimate betrayal.
When it comes to drugs, you know, some of them would sell their own granny.
A drug-dealing empire in Manchester.
To recover that quantity of money isn't something that the police see on a day-to-day basis. We are dealing with real serious criminals here.
With a 42-year-old matriarch calling the shots.
The way that she operated with her business, there was no need for her ever to get her hands dirty.
I've only ever worked in Lancashire, so I think I know the Lancashire folk. It has a real mix, the diverse communities we have. It's a great place to work and live. Always wanted to join the police. I've been in our force major investigation team since 2019, and it's took a number of years to get the correct skill, requirements to join the department. You have to be on top of your game, really, to try and get this role. On the night of the 19th of November 2019, police received numerous phone calls from members of the public reporting that somebody had been knocked down on King Street in Blackburn. We responded to that, thinking at that time, worst case, a hit and run. We had two people, unfortunately, laid on the floor, a male and a female, and the offending vehicle was nowhere to be seen. Then phone calls were made to our senior investigating officers to come and take command of that scene.
Veteran officer D.I. Lee Wilson was drafted in to take charge.
I very rarely worked over this side of the county. I tend to ply my trade over at the west side of the county. And I got the call from my superintendent, briefing, 9:30 tomorrow morning. Can you get yourself over and take charge of the investigation? I'm termed an SIO. Under me, I will have Detective Inspector, Detective Sergeants, and then we have a blend, really, of various disciplines. Two of the key players on this investigation were DS Mark Brennan, who was the allocator receiver. That's an absolutely key role.
My role is running the inquiry team. You understand the direction the boss wants to go in, and you're giving that out to the proper workers, often in the investigation, and they're feeding back to you, their inquiries that they're doing.
DC Lisa Bennett was the lead flow. Lisa will flag up the family's concerns, almost champion the family's corner within the investigation.
You're there as the point of contact between the investigation team and the family, feeding the family updates and also trying to extract as much information as you can from the family about the victim to try and find out why it's happened.
With a team in place, they launched Operation Woodford to investigate the crime.
There appeared to be something more than a, dare I say it, routine road traffic accident. This was not a vehicle with a blown tyre, a vehicle with defective steering. Watching that video on that first morning, this is clearly more sinister. This looks like a targeted attack.
The female victim, single mum Alison McBlain, had suffered horrific injuries and was in a critical condition. Family Liaison Officer DC Lisa Bennett was called in.
I was asked to go to Royal Blackburn Hospital to speak to the family of Alison McBlain. I remember getting to the hospital and speaking with Sharon, who was Alison's mum. I remember myself sitting them down and explaining that we were treating it as a criminal investigation, that it wasn't an accident. I think Sharon wasn't really listening to what I was saying to her. All she cared about was her daughter going to survive? Was she going to pull through?
They started to build a picture of the 36-year-old victim and those who depended on her.
Alison had a young son who was 12. At that point, he didn't know what had happened to his mum. There's no easy deployment at all, but when it involves children, it's tough.
Speaking to a number of eyewitnesses, people collectively were saying that they heard a noise, a vehicle driving, accelerating, with screeching sounds, but very few actually saw the actual impact itself.
Although there were few eyewitnesses, the impact was caught on CCTV.
From the review of the council CCTV, we could see the vehicle mounts the curb, gives a no quarter, hits the female. She's up into the air, off the bonnet, off the windscreen, and it's thrown about 30, 40 feet. He collapses in a heap, and then you can see him get up. He's looking around himself, clearly looking for his partner.
She sustained over 20 injuries to her body.
The injuries to the female victim were extremely serious, described as catastrophic.
The male sustained injuries mainly to his hands and his feet.
You can see pedestrians are, what on earth has just happened? And they step towards the male. He sees his partner's coat on the pavement. Obviously his mind is in shock, he's trying to process what's just happened, and he walks towards the coat and realises she's actually there on the floor, still inside the coat, in a terrible state. And he says to a member of the public, look after her, I can't hang around, and he disappears into the night.
With the male victim long gone, the team focused on finding the car, a silver Fiat Punto.
It was fast moving to begin with. Any officers that can be spared are brought to major investigations like this, whether it be uniformed colleagues, CID, whatever it may be. Every available resource is involved in that initial phase because the priority is to get that vehicle.
And the team effort paid off.
The vehicle was recovered fairly quickly after the attack, down an alley about a mile or so away, by a traffic officer who noticed this vehicle, and in fact it was smouldering, the contents were smouldering. He had the presence of mind to extinguish the fire. We could see the accident damage to the front of the vehicle. That looked wholly consistent with the collision, and also that one of the tyres had blown out, which you could see on the CCTV with the sparks as the steel came into contact with the roadway. So pretty happy that we had the right car. What is in there that might lead me to identify who the offenders are?
When we ran the registration through the police national computer, it came back registered to an identical make of vehicle, but it lived in a different county than Lancashire. Obviously, we conducted inquiries with themselves, but it was clear that person had nothing to do with it, and the vehicle was running on a cloned plate.
Basically, somebody had had possession of that vehicle and decided to mask its identity. And there'd been a concerted attempt to set fire to the car and, no doubt to my mind, to destroy evidence. So that makes me think straight away there's some sort of criminal element here, some element of pre-planning. Somebody's thought around this. How do we try and cover our tracks?
With the car badly damaged, they were not sure what evidence, if any, could be recovered. And there was more bad news from the hospital, where the young mum's condition was deteriorating.
So at that point, Alison was lying critical. She was on life support. I spoke to the doctor, the consultant, who basically told us that they didn't think she was going to pull through. And the next day, they would be doing brainstem tests to verify if there were any signs of life.
There was very little on police systems around that car being used in Blackburn prior to the attack. So we really didn't have anything to put somebody in the driver's seat. There he is. Inside the vehicle was covered in soot. All the soft furnishings, the door linings, they were all melted.
It was a really concerted attempt to try and destroy evidence within that vehicle. But there was forensic opportunities for us in the lower parts.
In the footwells of the vehicle, we recovered a bag of sweets, M&Ms if memory serves, a cigarette butt,
and a receipt for a local shop of an item that was purchased earlier that afternoon. Thankfully, had not set on fire itself. So our inquiries then were immediately turned to going to that shop and reviewing the CCTV.
And news came from the hospital about the hit-and-run victim, Alison McBlain.
And it all seemed to happen very quickly, that they told the family, unfortunately, there was nothing more they could do for Alison. They just turned the machine off and then she's gone. It is difficult.
With the death of Alison, the team were now investigating a murder.
We had to start to learn, start to speak with the family about our victims' lives. Why has this happened?
Family liaison officer Lisa Bennett started to talk to Alison's mum, Sharon.
We started asking Sharon about Alison's lifestyle to see if there was anything there. She had somewhat of a troubled life and she had turned to drugs. But recently, Sharon thought that Alison had turned a corner and that she'd managed to get herself clean of these drugs.
However, a new man on the scene seemed to have set Alison back.
Alison got involved with a male who was a boyfriend.
CCTV from a local fast food shop confirmed that the second victim that fateful night was indeed her new boyfriend.
He's the one person, to my mind, who can tell us who's most likely in that car. And I couldn't get to him because I couldn't find him. And I had to devote a lot of resources to getting hold of him. But eventually he came good. He's not the type of person who would want to speak to police officers readily, normally, but he did.
He was quite open with us, admitted to being himself a drug user. He gave us the background and the reasons to why they were targeted. The evening prior to the murder taking place, he had stolen some drugs off another individual. We then started to paint a picture that it was those individuals we were interested in.
So our two victims have been responsible for placing an order for drugs via this bully line, as it was called, this organised crime group, to purchase drugs. And instead of purchasing the drugs, they taxed, as they call it in drug parlance. They basically stole drugs from the occupants of that vehicle.
It was approximately £60 worth of drugs. I think it's a fair assumption to make that if you tax or rob, steal from a drugs line, then there's going to be some sort of repercussions.
The police still had no names, so they continued to try and build a picture of the events after the hit and run.
This murder took place on King Street, so we initially do a survey of King Street. This is relatively town centre as well. You then start identifying the vehicle and its direction of travel, and you keep growing that CCTV survey, keeping control of that vehicle, moving on to its next street, the next location, and wherever that may be.
The suspects had dumped the car in an area not covered by CCTV. But luckily there were cameras just along the road which captured them fleeing.
We'd had relatively grainy figures on CCTV, people leaving the dump site. They all went off in different directions, and it's then seeing where they go. We didn't know who the 4 occupants of the vehicle were at that time, but what we did know is that within half an hour or thereabouts of the murder taking place, the 4 people that were in that vehicle were all back in one address.
Which was about, I think, quarter of a mile, half a mile from where the car was dumped. It wasn't immediately set fire to. What appears to have happened is that the individuals have gone back towards this home, and then they came back, or rather 2 were sent back to set fire to the vehicle. So no doubt there had been a council of war, a gathering of the clan, or the group, or the gang, or whatever you want to call them, and they'd decided what to do next.
As well as a growing understanding of what had happened, the house in question at last gave the police the identity of one of the suspects, a small-scale drug gang boss who seemed to be at the centre of everything.
When we had these 4 individuals going back to this address and we arrested the male occupant, we would say that he's the head of this organised crime group who was given that instruction to go and do this revenge attack, because ultimately it was his drugs that were stolen. Which then started painting a picture of all his associates. We've got a team doing these CCTV surveys of all the area, and we started to identify the occupants of that vehicle.
Their best lead proved to be the surviving evidence from the burnt-out car.
The main thing that we got from that was, there's a receipt here from a transaction at a local store 2 or 3 hours before the murder. Go to the shop, see if they've got CCTV, time the transaction, and with a bit of luck, we'll get clips of people around the vehicle.
We were confident on who the driver was because many witnesses said he's been the driver of that vehicle for some period of time. He was wearing distinctive clothing, He's wearing the same clothing earlier in the afternoon as he is in the evening. His forensics within the vehicle as well. The front seat passenger was an easy one for us to identify because only a week or so before he'd injured his foot and was on crutches. You know, when we have somebody running on CCTV on crutches, that was quite a good indicator that he's our man.
We're looking around the hospitals and sure enough, we start to pick this individual up.
In relation to the back seat passengers, that proved a bit more difficult.
But I went internally to departments within the police, departments who work with social services closely. Do you know these two young people? And we got lucky. One of them was correctly identified.
The fourth one was our trickiest customer in relation to trying to identify who that final passenger was. We had several images of this individual on CCTV, but couldn't really identify exactly who he was, but he was consistent with a male that we had as a suspect. And then when we had the bottles of juice that was bought from the shop, and we recovered them back from the head of the organised crime group's address, when that person's DNA came back on that bottle, Mr. Wilson, the senior investigating officer, was elated.
I want them all arresting. I want them all questioning. They tried to get out of town, but they couldn't get out of town. They hadn't got the money to get out of town and live on the run. And eventually, they just fell. They just fell into place and they were arrested or surrendered.
5 men were now in custody, but one mystery remained. How had the killers known where to target Alison? Out of the blue, the family liaison officer took an anonymous call from a woman who claimed to have information.
I got a phone call on my police mobile. It was a withheld number and it was a female voice. Sounded younger, telling me that she had been with Alison moments before this had happened and that they'd had a conversation. I asked her for a name, she wasn't willing to give it to me. So I spoke to Sharon, Alison's mum, and told her how important, how crucial this witness was. If she could try and persuade her to come forward, then it would really, really help. So Sharon had a conversation with her and she gave her permission to give her name to me, the female who was Caris Poynton.
28-year-old Caris was another drug user and a friend of Alison.
We decided that we would have a look at what had happened in the immediate moments really before the attack. And what we knew was from the surviving victim that they'd split up briefly and that the female had gone into a local pharmacy just at the back of a garage forecourt, and she'd gone there ostensibly to pick up her methadone prescription. She was in there, we had the CCTV of that, she was wearing the same distinctive yellow coat. As she comes out of that premises, she, I suppose metaphorically and literally, bumps into somebody who she clearly knows.
By looking at the CCTV camera, you would believe that they're friends. The female victim then left the chemist and walked on King Street.
That female goes into the same pharmacy as our victim and instantly, and I mean instantly, is straight on her phone. Who's she ringing? Highly suspicious. Highly, highly suspicious. She keeps the door propped open and she's almost, we think, commentating. She appears to be studying where our victim's going.
What you're viewing there is her contacting the Buller line to give away the location of a friend.
She'd actually rung the people in the car. And we knew from other phone work that that group had put out to the drug-using community, if you tell us where they can be found, then we will sort you out and give you drugs or give you cash. And she literally put the black spot on her friend. She was at the funeral, clearly grief-stricken, and all the while she knew exactly what she'd done.
She knew that Alison was dead, partially because of her. But when it comes to drugs, you know, some of them would sell their own granny.
The reason her friend was dead was because she put that phone call in. We were able to pull that evidence together. She was arrested, she was brought in, and she was charged actually jointly with the murder.
At the Crown Court, the driver of the car, Caleb Conley, was found guilty of murder and received 14 years. Dean Kayam, the front seat passenger, was also found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 20 years. Passenger Joshua Titterington received 17 and a half years. The 16-year-old was found not guilty. For ordering the hit and run, John Chatwood received 14 years for manslaughter. Finally, Caris Poynton, Alison's friend, was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 13 years.
When I heard the verdict and we'd got back in a room with the family, we all shed a tear. We'd got justice.
But how do you ever replace a loved one? You know, how does a son ever replace his mother?
Every case brings its own challenges, and there can be no better purpose than to bring the offenders responsible for taking another person's life to justice.
From March 2020 to 2021, there were over 200,000 drug offences recorded in England and Wales. That's a leap of almost 20% on the year before. In Greater Manchester in 2019, there were over 196 deaths from the misuse of illegal drugs, the highest figure since 1993.
Manchester's such a diverse place to live. I've worked for Greater Manchester Police now for 27 years. I'm a detective inspector in the Serious Organised Crime Group. You don't know what challenges you're going to face and what work you're going to be dealing with. Manchester, like all major cities, has got varying degrees of drug criminality, so there remains a constant supply because there's a constant demand for it. So by targeting the people who are supplying the drugs, the hope is that we can bring down violent crime.
One family of criminals well known to the Serious and Organised Crime Group are the Dins.
Who'd previously been known to the police some years ago when 3 members of the family had been arrested in connection with the supply of large amounts of Class A drugs. So 2 members of the family had been imprisoned, and from that point, things had gone relatively quiet.
But the team had word that other members of the gang had recently picked up the gauntlet.
We then started to realise they had carried on going, but had restructured in terms of who was running things and who was now in charge. Omar Din, who'd fled to Dubai, had previously been in charge. His sister, Shazia, had taken over. The foundation's in place for us really to start doing more research, starting to run a wider operation into Shazia and her family.
To find out the scale of the drug dealing, DI Smethurst built a team, including an officer with specialist gang knowledge, DC Chris.
Chris is a real enthusiastic officer, very, very passionate about his role and expects the same from his colleagues, basically, in terms of if he's giving 120%, he expects other people to be giving exactly the same.
DC Chris still works undercover and his identity needs to remain hidden.
The job in the Serious Organised Crime Group is targeting and disrupting the top-level criminals, groups, organised crime gangs that are committing crime, i.e. moving large amounts of drugs, supplying firearms. We'll target them to disrupt them and if we can remove them from the streets.
To target the drug dealing activities of the Din family, they set up Operation Heart.
We were well aware of the Din family. They were previously known to the police. Adey Din had been convicted for supplying kilo amounts of cocaine in the Salford area years earlier, and now was on licence, and the information was now saying that another sibling, Shazia Din, had taken up the mantle of supplying those drugs.
We will use a lot of surveillance, so we started to try and gain an understanding of Shazia's lifestyle and how she was coming by the income and the money that she seemed to have.
But on closer investigation, the family business and online beauty shop did not appear to be generating this amount of cash.
As we looked more into it, finances that were being declared by this business in terms of the profits that it was making, it didn't support the lifestyle that was being led by members of the Din family.
The business sold everything from body lotion to mascara online, but nowhere near the volumes to account for their spending.
That started to raise concerns, and we started to ask the question, well, where's the rest of this money coming from that they're spending, that they're living the lifestyle with, because it's not being generated legitimately.
The team began surveillance of the rumoured new boss, 42-year-old Shazia Din.
Other than meeting with family members, the only other person really that we could see any contact with her was the man from Doncaster called Peter After.
He had previous convictions for being involved in supplying kilo amounts of Class A drugs.
Rafter was well known within the criminal community within South Yorkshire.
Surveillance officers observed Peter Rafter meeting Shazia Din quite frequently at various locations.
That again raises more alarm bells with us. What is the relationship between these two people? So we started to try to gain an understanding of what that relationship was about and why it existed.
Shazia and Peter Rafter would meet up, and it was almost like instructions were verbally given face to face, and then Peter Rafter would go away and conduct the exchanges, i.e. passing cash or moving drugs.
Peter Rafter seemed to be a man who was connected with members of other criminal groups and would offer us opportunities to try and evidence the criminality of the gang. If we were going to be successful in investigating this group, he was going to be our way in.
The team continued to watch Peter Rafter in the hope that he would lead them to the bigger prize, Shazia Din. But soon became frustrated that Shazia was never seen to be directly involved.
Peter Rafter was observed meeting Shazia Din in Bury. After some communication, Peter Rafter then drove around the corner where he was observed meeting a courier and passing him a bag. The courier then drove with this bag to another part of Manchester where he was then stopped by a traffic patrol. The courier was arrested. He had a hold all with a large amount of cash. That money had been brought from a customer in South Yorkshire by Peter Rafter.
Rafter was not arrested, but along with the courier and cash, the police seized a mobile phone.
We were then able to establish his cell site, his call records, who he's in contact with and his movements, to establish how the couriers for this organised crime group were working.
Just as they were starting to build a picture of the structure of the drug-dealing gang and its expansion in South Yorkshire, news came through which forced their hand.
In an ideal world, we wanted to allow Peter Rafter to carry on out and about, meeting other criminals so as we would gain a better understanding of who else was involved with the group. We then received some other intelligence to say that Peter Rafter might have possession of a firearm. That in itself, obviously, is something that the police need to react to. And it became paramount for me that we either proved or disproved that intelligence. And the only way we could do that was by stopping Peter Rafter and then searching him, his vehicle and his properties.
Peter Rafter was stopped in his van and he was found in possession of a revolver and ammunition. So he was subsequently arrested. Upon his person, he had keys to another vehicle which was parked outside his home address. Within that van was 28 kilos of amphetamine and 1 kilo of heroin.
Peter Rafter received a lengthy custodial sentence. He got 12 years in total.
Taking Rafter off the streets was vital, but it had a massive impact on the broader year-long investigation into the dens.
We were left now with Shazia and a vacuum in terms of who's now working for Shazia. As an investigation, it was almost a setback because Rafter was central to everything we were trying to achieve.
A second line of attack was to focus on other members of Shazia Din's family.
We started to work out that her son Hassan was quite involved with the crime group and that he was potentially working on Shazia's behalf. We established that Hassan had got control of a new apartment within Bury town centre and wasn't living there. That had all the hallmarks that it was being used as a criminal safe house.
We observed Hassan Din leaving in possession of a large, heavy hold-all. At this point, Adey Din pulls up in her Mercedes vehicle and Hassan Din enters with this large, heavy bag. Adey then drives a short distance around the corner to a car park where Hassan exits Adey's vehicle in possession of this bag and places it into the boot of his own vehicle. Surveillance officers then observed Hassan drive with this bag up to a location north of Bury. At this location, Hassan met with a drugs courier who had a small white van. Surveillance officer observed the courier approach Hassan Din in the driver's seat and show him what we believe to be an encrypted phone as ratification that he was meeting the right person, because couriers don't always know who they're meeting, so passwords can be passed so you know you're meeting the correct individual. The courier then removed this hold all from Hassan's vehicle and placed it into his home vehicle. The courier then drove from Bury all the way to South Manchester.
We decided to follow that bag, and in turn that bag was then handed over to somebody else. And because there'd been a bit of a time delay between Hassan having had the bag and it being in the hands of the third party, we decided to stop the third party. And when we did so, we found that the bag contained over £170,000 in cash.
The other man turned out to be a money launderer, and although Hassan had been involved, there was not enough evidence to charge him.
To recover that quantity of money isn't something that the police see on a day-to-day basis. It has real alarm bells ringing. We are dealing with real serious criminals here.
A significant amount of cash that we could directly link to the Dins, but we didn't have any Class A drugs at this point that we could directly link to Hassan, Shazia and Abia. So the investigation operation had to continue.
A week later, Hassan Din was arrested for a completely unrelated matter, and the team got access to the flat in Bury.
We obtained the key and the key fob to the apartment at the Rock in Bury, where we had seen him leaving that apartment with this large amount of cash. And we went and searched the apartment. In the kitchen, there was a cash counting machine and a large amount of cash, £66,000 vacuum packed on the kitchen worktop. And there was a set of digital scales which had traces of cocaine, which we believe was for weighing large amounts of Class A drugs.
With only traces of cocaine, they still didn't have enough evidence to secure any conviction, and certainly nothing to tie in Shazia. Throughout the investigation, the team were also working to target lower-level members of the drugs network.
We were now starting to cause real problems for Shazia, but for whatever reason, it just didn't seem to deter Shazia from being involved in this criminality. And we still continue to see the patterns of telephone calls and the movement between members of the Great Manchester community across to Doncaster at the relevant times when the phone calls were going on. We reacted to those on about another 2 or 3 occasions.
Even with multiple arrests, none of the foot soldiers could point the finger at suspected boss Shazia.
Even though people working for them are getting stopped and arrested in possession of drugs and cash, they're never going to be able to name the Din family because they don't know who they are. They carried on continuing with their business.
The investigation had a third way into Shazia's empire, and it began only a month after the jailing of the original Din courier, Peter Rafter. The team had seen Shazia Din at a meeting outside Doncaster prison.
It was a real surprise when we saw Shazia meet up with Natalie Rafter, who was Peter's daughter.
Shazia had had a pre-arranged visit with Natalie Rafter to see him in the prison with Peter Rafter's grandchild, Natalie's 2-year-old son as well.
We'd had contact between Natalie and Shazia before on the phones. We'd seen that through telephone calls.
After the prison visit, Natalie Rafter was observed passing large amounts of cash to Shazia Din. It was bundles of cash being put in the boot of Shazia's vehicle. Having visited her father, who's in prison for drugs offences, and then committing a criminal act in the car park of the prison in full view of everybody, Natalie Rafter had become involved in this conspiracy.
We then started to work on the view that actually Natalie was now running the Doncaster side of the organised crime group. So we started to look at the relationship between Shazia and Natalie Rafter and started to try and make some sense around who Natalie Rafter was speaking to. And from that, we established that she was having contact with a number of criminal groups within Doncaster. And we worked out that at various times when Natalie was in contact with Shazia, a short time later would then be a supply of drugs over into Doncaster. We were able to deploy surveillance and we captured a man called Lee Davis. We saw him meet up with a group from Doncaster and we saw a package get exchanged.
We'd established that Lee Davis, who was a Manchester criminal, had supplied South Yorkshire with a kilo block of cocaine. So the operation shifted onto him. We believed he was then somebody who was working for the Dinn family and filling that void that Peter Rafter once did. And so surveillance centred around him, what he was doing, who he was speaking to, who he was visiting.
One of the places they saw him visit frequently was a block of flats.
He'd got access to a flat in Salford, but was contained within a flat block of about 30 flats. We just couldn't link Davis to any particular flat at all. And at this point, we were starting to get a little bit frustrated.
A week later, the team got another possible lead.
Based on information we'd received, we conducted a search warrant at Lee Davis's business premises, a garage just outside the city centre of Manchester. Lee Davis wasn't present, but within that mechanic's garage, we discovered several kilos of heroin and we recovered a hydraulic press which was used in the production of heroin.
And this is where things took a little bit of a twist, really, and sometimes you just got to take a bit of a punt with information. I made a decision that night we would deploy surveillance to the area of this flat in Salford and just see whether we could link Davis to the flat and whether the intelligence that I'd had was correct. And lo and behold, as I was there on surveillance myself, having turned out just in my flip-flops, my shorts and a T-shirt, Davis came to the flat in his van and he came out of the flat block carrying a cardboard box. We decided to go over and speak to Davis and just to see what was in the box. And when we stopped and searched him, within the box were 12 kilos of heroin. And we had Davis arrested in possession at that time with 12 kilos of heroin.
We then discovered Lee Davis was in possession of keys to a flat within this flat block. Within there, we discovered another 16 kilograms of heroin. So in total, 28 kilograms of heroin with a potential street value of over £2.8 million.
When Lee Davis was arrested, he hadn't time to turn off his encrypted mobile phone.
Because he just wasn't expecting us at that time. It enabled us to get access to his phones. We were able to then show his links back in to Shazia and to Hassan and to other members of the Dinn family. So Shazia sits at the top, keeping her hands clean, and Lee Davis was effectively doing a lot of the dirty work for the family. He was the man storing the drugs, he was the man moving the drugs around.
After 2 years of intense investigative work, the team were ready to act.
We believe we had enough evidence then. We'd had enough drugs seized, we had enough events observed on surveillance, and we had enough links from the call data.
We're good to go here, we need to start arresting people. We were taking out Shazia and her sister Abia. We'd got Hassan, who was her son, who was doing the day-to-day management. Lower down that scale, we'd got the drivers, we'd got the people who were storing the drugs, and then we'd got Natalie, who was arranging the supply of drugs within Doncaster.
From the business premises of the Dinns, several thousand ecstasy pills were recovered from the office area. We conducted a warrant at an industrial unit in Doncaster and recovered a large amount of amphetamine, heroin, MDMA and cannabis, a street value of about £120,000 worth of drugs.
The 2014 generation of Dinn criminals had been caught with £500,000 worth of drugs. The haul from the Shazia Dinn investigation was nearly £3 million.
Shazia, you've been arrested this morning on suspicion of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs.
No comment.
So Shazia Dinn, what relation is she to you?
No comment.
How often do you see Shazia?
No comment.
How would you describe your relationship?
No comment.
Is Shazia a business partner of yours?
No comment.
Okay, no problem.
The Rock in Bury, which is an apartment, a flat. Do you know that address?
No comment.
When was you last there?
No comment.
So after you've both been to see Peter, why is his daughter putting large amounts of money in your boot?
Don't remember.
The daughter of a drug dealer. If you can't remember what it is, then how do you know it wasn't cash?
Because I know it wasn't cash. It was because she gives me stuff, she gives me candles and stuff like that, treats for the dogs.
The Dinn family remained largely silent, But Lee Davies suddenly claimed he had been forced into the crimes.
I'm scared. I'm scared now, you know, and it's like, I'm dead. I'm a dead man walking. Okay. I've got nothing left in me, you know, I've got nothing left in me. I don't know what to do.
So now linked to you, so that's 22 kilograms of heroin, which is worth over £2 million. Okay?
The Dins were behind bars. The beauty booth business was shut down, and at Manchester Crown Court, Lee Davies' story changed and he pleaded guilty. He was convicted of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and sentenced to 9 years. Natalie Rafter was sentenced to 11 years and 4 months. Hassan Din received 14 years. Abia Din's previous convictions meant she received 18 years. And the family matriarch, Shazia Din, was sentenced to 15 years.
It was the biggest case that I've ever worked on. It spanned over 2 years, the volumes of surveillance, the volume of drugs recovered.
At that point, when everyone's in the police cells and he's being interviewed or being charged, you think that's it. We've achieved what we set out to achieve. Hopefully we've made a real difference to the people of Manchester.